So one of the things we're going to go over, and this is something that we do in Warrior Flow, and that is how can we improve ourselves? So when I was studying under my masters, one of the things, especially Master Karen, Grandmaster Karen was big on, and that was doing exercises and actually practicing your craft. And he was very big on it, especially in the beginning. In the book that I'm coming out with, Lessons from My Masters, pretty much the first part of the book really goes over my experiences, not everything, but my experiences of what I think were some of the more critical aspects of things he made me do in my observations of the importance of those things. Because people would ask me, how do I get better? They say, oh, do you do the exercises? Do you practice on your own? And a lot of times they would say no. And I'm like, okay, so when you were in high school and you didn't study for a math test and you got a 20 on the test, I don't care what you told your mom. You know why you failed. You know why you didn't do well, because you didn't put the effort in. You didn't put the work in. And it's no different when it comes to training. So even in art, when I used to do guided cast, even though there's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily physically hard to do, but up here mentally, you got to put the brain power into it, because you got to concentrate to get your body to respond the way you want to respond. The other thing is, when you're training, Grandmaster Karen, he was actually big on modeling. Now, he didn't call it modeling, but this is what he was doing. And he used to model John all the time. And he taught me how to actually pay attention to things that John was doing and how to model John. In other words, modeling is a calculus. In other words, there are things that have to take place in order for something to happen. And if you understand modeling, now you're looking at a situation with a different pair of eyes. So now when you're looking at something that John was doing, or you're watching a video of John, may he rest in peace, you can actually start paying attention and say, okay, see what he did there. See, now that was unique. And that seemed to come out of the ether. And that was because as he was doing things and moving, there were things that his body just knew how to do. He didn't have to think about it. But if you paid attention to it, you could develop those abilities for yourself. So when we're talking about modeling, what you need to understand is modeling, and I'll talk about this in some of the other videos, modeling is not mimicking. Too many people confuse that because they don't know what modeling is. So what they'll do is they'll see something that John did, or they'll see something that Tim did, or they'll experience something and they'll say, oh yeah, well, I noticed Tim, he likes to do this thing a lot. He'll be standing there, he likes to do this thing, or Tim does this, or Tim does that, without any conception of why they do what they do. They're just looking at it, and so they say, well, I'm going to do what he does, the way he does it. Well, no, you're not doing it the way he does it. First of all, there are things he's doing that are only personal to him, because only he can feel how he feels in his body. That's why modeling is important, because you can't obviously feel exactly what another person's experiencing, because those experiences are personal to them. But because we're both human, we're all human, you can gain an appreciation for what's going on, because your body kind of works the same way. So when we're talking about modeling, what we're talking about really is this calculus. People who mimic things that John or Tim did, they're wasting their time. I'm just telling you, you're wasting your time because of the fact that you're scratching the surface of something. It's kind of like Gishin Funakoshi said it best in his book, his autobiography, and that is, people who think karate is about breaking boards and plucking people's ribs out are fooling around the leaves and branches of a great tree without any conception of its trunk. And that's what you're doing when you're mimicking. You want to model exactly what they're doing. So I'll give an example of modeling. John was big on drop hitting, and he talked about how he drop hit, or how he dropped on everything. But if you watched how he moved, you almost never saw him drop unless he was doing a demonstration. And the reason was because he had been doing the drop for so long, it had become so intuitive to him that it was just something he could do. So it wasn't that he wasn't doing it, it's just that it was hard to discern it unless you were in direct contact with him where you could feel him do it to you. So what would happen is you would get people who would be taking it literally and without any understanding of what's really going on, and they're just sitting there and all they're doing all the time, and they're just doing this kind of stuff all the time, or every time they want to hit, they're doing these kind of drops, and they're just giving away or just giving away what it was they were trying to do. When John was dropping, he was doing more of an internal drop. And what he was doing was, he had broken it down to its smallest components, where it became one fluid thing. So in Warrior Flow, one of the things we do is we do a thing called progressive desensitization, but we also use a thing called deconstruction. So for example, the drop is really several components. There's the dropping component, and then there's the striking component, but also there's an alignment that has to take place. And so you can actually practice first the dropping, then the dropping with the turn, and then the dropping and the striking, and then of course the sudden deceleration as you penetrate. And so as you practice that and you deconstruct it, now that you're deconstructing the drop, what happens is, over time, if you practice it enough, it refines itself, provided you don't get too crazy about it, where it gets to the point where it's just something you do. It becomes so effortless for you, and it becomes so seamless. And the reason is, every technique, every skill is not one thing. It only looks that way when people do it, but it's actually multiple things seamlessly stitched together, so that as you do those things and you bring them together, it seems like one thing. And then of course the next thing you do after that, you can seamlessly, as I was, be stitched together to do another thing. So if I got my bag here and I want to practice dropping, I can first start off, and I'll stand like this so you can see. I'll first start off getting the drop, getting the feel. Then I'll start getting maybe a little bit of a turn in there. And then I'll start actually dropping and hitting. And then I'll refine it from there, putting more of a snap to it, or more of a cutting force to it, as opposed to pushing. And then finally, you get to the point where it becomes so smooth, where you move as little as you need in the body. I can still feel myself dropping. I can still feel myself rotating. I can still feel my arm structuring at the right moment at the right time when I'm doing that. But the reality is, because I've done it so much and practiced it, probably a million times, I don't need to do a full drop and hit somebody with power, seemingly out of the ether. This was one of the qualities that John and Tim had that was amazing. Especially Tim, because he had long arms. Tim could hit you out of the ether from angles that made no sense, because he knew how to position his body within movement to be able to make it work. But in order to get that way, you got to practice and you got to develop your body.